Cop accused black man of stealing his own car. Turns out he's a state Supreme Court judge. Among the crowd, there was a man who stood out not because of his height or looks, but because of the respect he carried in every step he took. His name was Marcus Green, a state Supreme Court judge, a man who had dedicated his life to justice and fairness. Yet that morning, Marcus would find himself in a situation that no title, badge, or respect could shield him from. Marcus had always believed in the principles of law, fairness, and equality. From a young age, he had known the value of standing up for what was right. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and people often judged one another before knowing the truth, he had learned early that appearances could be misleading. Despite the challenges, he pursued his education with determination, knowing that one day he could make a difference not just for himself, but for his entire community. He studied law with passion, eventually rising to the position of state Supreme Court judge. People looked up to him, not just because of his position, but because of the integrity he showed in every decision he made. That morning, Marcus was dressed in his usual professional attire, a crisp suit, polished shoes, and a calm demeanor. He had parked his car on a familiar street, one he had used countless times. The car was his pride, a sleek, dark-colored vehicle that he had purchased after years of hard work. To him, it represented more than just transportation. It was a symbol of the journey he had taken from a small neighborhood to the highest levels of the state judiciary. As Marcus walked away from his car, briefcase in hand, he had no idea that this ordinary act of parking and leaving his vehicle would soon become the center of an extraordinary event. He was focused on the work ahead, preparing for a day filled with hearings, meetings, and decisions that could impact the lives of countless people. Justice, he knew, required attention, patience, and clarity of mind. He had cultivated all these qualities over years of experience. Meanwhile, across the street, Officer Daniel Price was beginning his morning patrol. He had served in the police force for over a decade and prided himself on keeping the streets safe. But like many officers, his job often required him to make split-second judgments. He had been trained to spot suspicious activity, to question unusual behavior, and to intervene when something seemed out of place. Yet even the most experienced officers were human, and human judgment could sometimes be clouded by assumptions. As Officer Price scanned the street, his eyes fell on a man standing near a parked car. Something about the scene caught his attention. Perhaps it was the man's nervous glance, or maybe it was the car itself, dark, sleek, and seemingly out of place in that particular area. Whatever the reason, Officer Price felt a spark of suspicion. In his mind, the scenario began to form: a man near a car that might not belong to him. His training kicked in, and without fully processing the situation, he approached the man, intending to investigate. Marcus noticed the officer walking toward him, but he did not feel threatened at first. After all, he had never had any trouble with the law. He straightened his posture and greeted the officer politely, expecting a routine question or perhaps a friendly check. "Good morning, officer," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Good morning, sir," Officer Price replied, his tone formal but firm. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Marcus explained that he was the owner of the car, showing his registration and identification. He spoke clearly, confident that the misunderstanding would be resolved quickly. After all, it was a simple matter of proving ownership. Yet, despite his polite explanation, he could sense that the officer remained unconvinced. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable. The street, normally filled with the sounds of daily life, seemed to pause. People walking by noticed the interaction, some stopping to watch, curious about the unusual scene. Marcus felt a strange mix of disbelief and frustration. Here he was, a man who had spent his life upholding the law, suddenly being treated as if he were breaking it. It was a situation he had never imagined, one that challenged not only his patience but also his sense of dignity. As the minutes passed, the officer asked Marcus to step out of the car. Marcus complied, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. He understood the importance of cooperating, even when the situation felt unjust. Yet, he could not hide the inner conflict he felt. How could a person who had dedicated his life to justice be seen as a suspect in his own life? How could the uniform meant to protect him instead create fear and tension? The bystanders grew more curious, some even taking out their phones to record the interaction. Social media had changed the way such incidents unfolded. A moment could become public within minutes. Marcus, ever aware of the broader implications, knew that maintaining composure was crucial. Every word, every gesture could influence not only the immediate situation, but also the perception of justice itself. Officer Price continued to question Marcus, asking for further proof of ownership. Marcus handed over his registration and explained the history of the car, recounting how he had purchased it, the paperwork involved, and the steps he had taken to ensure it was properly registered. Yet the officer's skepticism remained. There was a disconnect between what Marcus knew to be true and what the officer perceived. This disconnect, rooted in assumptions and bias, was about to create a moment that would be remembered far beyond that street. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself of the principles he had always lived by: patience, clarity, and respect. He knew that anger or frustration could escalate the situation, and he was determined not to allow it. Still, he could not ignore the reality of what was happening. A simple act, parking his car, had transformed into an encounter that exposed the very vulnerabilities he had hoped to overcome in his career. As the interaction continued, Marcus's mind wandered briefly to the lessons he had learned throughout his life. He remembered the teachers, mentors, and colleagues who had guided him, emphasizing the importance of integrity, empathy, and resilience. He thought of the young people in his community who looked up to him, hoping to see justice and fairness in action. And he realized that even in moments of personal challenge, the principles he stood for could serve as a guiding light, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the officer decided to run a check on the registration. Marcus remained calm, observing the officer's actions without interference. The street around them buzzed with quiet anticipation. Passers-by whispered among themselves, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Marcus felt a mix of hope and anxiety: hope that the truth would soon be recognized, and anxiety over how long it might take for reason to prevail. In that moment, Marcus understood something fundamental about life and justice: that even those who serve the law are not immune to the assumptions and biases of others. It was a humbling realization, one that reminded him that fairness required constant vigilance, awareness, and courage. He also recognized the power of presence, calmness, and dignity in the face of misunderstanding. How one responds to injustice, he knew, could leave a lasting impression far beyond the immediate moment. As the officer continued his check, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From childhood challenges to academic achievements, from courtroom victories to community service, he had worked tirelessly to embody the principles of justice. And yet, life had a way of reminding even the most accomplished individuals that respect and fairness were not always guaranteed. It was a lesson in humility, resilience, and the enduring need to fight for what was right, not only in the courtroom but in every interaction, no matter how ordinary it seemed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the street, highlighting the tense scene. Marcus stood beside his car, calm but resolute, embodying the dignity and patience that had defined his life. Around him, the city carried on, unaware of the personal struggle unfolding in its midst. And in that ordinary yet extraordinary moment, Marcus Green, a man who had spent his life upholding justice, was about to experience firsthand the very challenges he had spent decades addressing: the delicate balance between authority, perception, and the undeniable reality of human judgment. As the minutes stretched on, the tension between Marcus Green and Officer Daniel Price grew more palpable. The busy street, which only moments ago had been filled with the casual rhythm of city life, now seemed quieter, as if it were holding its breath. Passers-by slowed down, sensing that something unusual was happening. Some whispered to each other, others stopped to watch, their curiosity growing with every exchange. Marcus could feel the eyes of strangers on him, and although he had long been accustomed to public scrutiny in his role as a judge, this was different. This was not a courtroom. There were no rules to control how people might perceive him. Marcus kept his hands visible, showing every sign of cooperation. His calm demeanor was a deliberate choice. He knew that any sudden movement, any hint of irritation, could be misinterpreted. Yet beneath his composed exterior, there was a storm of emotions. Frustration, disbelief, and a tinge of fear swirled together, creating a tension that was hard to ignore. How could it be possible that someone could mistake him, Marcus Green, a man whose name carried authority and respect, for a criminal? The thought seemed surreal, almost impossible. Officer Price, for his part, was operating under a very different set of assumptions. He had been trained to act quickly, to respond to potential threats, and to protect public safety. In his mind, there were clear rules. A man standing near a car that appeared to be out of place warranted investigation. He had seen stolen vehicles before, and each encounter carried its own risks. To him, the situation seemed straightforward, but his perception was clouded by assumptions. He did not yet know that the man before him was not a criminal, but a respected judge. The officer's questions became more insistent. "Sir, I need to see your ID and proof of ownership again," he said firmly. "Step aside while I run a check." Marcus complied, moving carefully to the side, but his voice remained calm and measured. "Officer, I've already shown my registration and ID. This car belongs to me. You can see that the information matches my name. Please check the records and you'll see that I am the owner." The officer nodded, but there was no sign of immediate understanding. He reached for his radio, calling in a verification check. Marcus stood patiently, aware that the process could take time. He observed the small details of the scene around him, the way people lingered on the sidewalks, some filming with their phones, some simply watching in silence. There was a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and skepticism in their eyes. Marcus felt a strange sense of vulnerability. Here he was, a man who had spent decades defending the law, now subject to it in a way he had never anticipated. The tension in the air was thick. Marcus noticed a young couple standing nearby, whispering to each other. The woman's eyes were wide with concern, while the man's lips were pressed together, as if unsure how to react. A delivery driver paused on his bicycle, watching the unfolding scene with a mixture of interest and worry. Even the pigeons seemed to sense the tension, circling above the street in nervous flocks. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself that losing composure could make the situation worse. He had trained himself for moments like this, not in the streets, but in courtrooms where tempers flared and stakes were high. Yet this was different. In the courtroom, he had authority. Here, he was just another man trying to prove his innocence. He realized that authority, no matter how well earned, could be challenged in the blink of an eye. Officer Price returned from his radio call, frowning slightly. "The registration comes back to your name, sir. Are you sure you're the owner?" Marcus nodded, keeping his voice steady. "Yes, officer, this car has been mine for several years. I've paid for it, registered it, and insured it under my name. You can verify all of it with the records." Despite this confirmation, the officer seemed hesitant. He glanced at the crowd that had begun to gather, perhaps feeling the pressure of onlookers. Yet, he did not immediately apologize or relax his stance. The tension between protocol, human judgment, and public perception was evident in every movement he made. Marcus realized that the misunderstanding was not just about a car. It was about assumptions, about biases that could cloud even the most routine interactions. As the situation continued, Marcus noticed the subtle ways the crowd reacted. Some people whispered words of encouragement to him, quietly expressing support. Others seemed unsure, caught between the desire to intervene and the fear of escalating the conflict. A few teenagers nearby giggled nervously, pointing their phones at the scene. Marcus understood that in today's world, moments like this could quickly become public, sometimes misrepresented, sometimes magnified. He felt the weight of responsibility, not just for himself, but for how the incident might be perceived by others. The officer, sensing the tension in the crowd, tried to maintain control. "Sir, I need you to remain calm while I verify the information," he said, his voice firm but slightly strained. "It's routine procedure." Marcus nodded, understanding the logic, but he could not ignore the underlying discomfort. "Officer, I understand procedure," he replied. "I respect your role, but I hope you understand that I am not resisting. I am simply asking for the truth to be recognized." The words seemed to hang in the air, resonating not just with the officer but with those watching. It was a reminder that patience, clarity, and integrity could speak louder than force or authority. Marcus realized that how he handled this moment could set an example for everyone present, an opportunity to demonstrate dignity in the face of misunderstanding. Minutes passed, and the officer continued his verification. Marcus remained calm, though his mind raced with thoughts. He considered the irony of the situation. Here he was, a man who had spent years adjudicating cases, upholding justice, and protecting the rights of others, now being treated as if he were the very criminal he had spent his life opposing. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of perception and how easily assumptions could override reality. As he waited, Marcus thought about the broader implications. He considered the countless people who faced similar misunderstandings every day, people judged by the color of their skin, by their appearance, or by where they were at a particular moment. He knew that this incident, while personal, reflected a larger truth about society. That bias, even unintentional, could shape interactions and outcomes in profound ways. The officer finally received confirmation from the verification system. He looked at Marcus, a mixture of surprise and embarrassment crossing his face. The registration and records confirmed what Marcus had said all along: the car belonged to him. Marcus kept his expression neutral, neither gloating nor showing frustration. He understood that emotions in moments like this could escalate situations unnecessarily. Yet, despite the resolution, the experience left a mark. Marcus felt a combination of relief and reflection. Relief that the misunderstanding had been cleared up, but reflection on how easily it had occurred. He understood that respect and fairness were not automatic. They had to be earned, recognized, and upheld in every interaction. Even a man of his position was not immune to misjudgment. The officer stepped back slightly, finally acknowledging the truth. "I apologize for the confusion, sir," he said, his voice tinged with hesitation. "I didn't realize." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology but choosing to respond with grace. "Thank you, officer. I understand that mistakes happen. I hope this can serve as a reminder for all of us to remain aware and considerate in our actions." The crowd began to disperse, some still whispering about the unusual encounter, others shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. Marcus returned to his car, taking a moment to steady himself. He reflected on the incident, recognizing both the vulnerability and the strength it revealed. Even in the face of misunderstanding, composure, patience, and dignity could prevail. As he drove away, Marcus thought about the lessons embedded in the encounter. He considered how important it was to continue advocating for fairness and understanding, not just in the courtroom, but in everyday life. The experience reinforced his belief that justice was not just about laws and regulations. It was about human empathy, awareness, and the courage to act with integrity even when others misjudge you. Marcus knew that he would carry this incident with him, not as a source of bitterness, but as a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. He understood that the path to equality and fairness was ongoing, requiring patience, reflection, and the willingness to face challenges head-on. And as he prepared for the day ahead, he resolved to use the experience to continue promoting understanding, compassion, and respect in every interaction he had, both inside and outside the courtroom. Even after the verification confirmed that the car belonged to Marcus Green. The situation was far from over. In the brief moments of relief, Marcus realized that the incident had attracted more attention than he initially noticed. Crowds of people had gathered, some curious, some concerned, and some quietly judging. Whispers filled the air, mixed with the faint sound of traffic and distant city life. Marcus understood that while the misunderstanding was technically resolved, the aftermath of the encounter could have lasting effects. The emotions of the people involved, the officer, the bystanders, and himself, had created a charged atmosphere, one that required careful handling. Officer Daniel Price shifted slightly, clearly uncomfortable. The officer's initial confidence had been replaced by hesitation, as if the weight of the moment had finally settled on his shoulders. Marcus watched him closely, noting the subtle changes in posture and expression. There was a tension between duty and realization, a conflict that every person in a position of authority experiences at some point. Officer Price had acted according to his training, but the human consequences of his assumptions were now impossible to ignore. Marcus took a deep breath, sensing that this was the crucial moment. The interaction could end quietly, or it could escalate further, depending on how both parties chose to act. He knew that words could either calm or inflame the situation. In the past, he had faced similar challenges in courtrooms, where careful phrasing and measured tone were essential to maintaining control. This moment, though informal, demanded the same awareness. "Officer," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm, "I understand that you were following protocol and I respect your role. But I also hope you can recognize the impact of assumptions and the importance of understanding before judgment." The officer looked at him, a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. He nodded slightly, as if he understood, yet something remained unspoken. Perhaps it was the difficulty of admitting error or the lingering tension from the crowd around them. Whatever it was, Marcus realized that the human element, the mixture of pride, fear, and responsibility, was just as significant as any legal or procedural aspect of the encounter. Nearby, the onlookers remained engaged. Some whispered to one another, recounting what they had seen. Phones captured snippets of the incident, destined to spread quickly in the age of social media. Marcus noticed a few individuals approaching cautiously, as if unsure whether to intervene or simply observe. He understood their curiosity, but he also recognized the potential for misinterpretation. One wrong word or gesture could shift the narrative in ways beyond anyone's control. Marcus decided to take the lead in shaping the outcome. "I want to ensure that no harm comes from this misunderstanding," he said. "This encounter could serve as a learning moment, not just for us, but for everyone watching. Respect, patience, and clarity are essential in every interaction." The officer nodded again, and this time his expression softened. It was clear that he was grappling with the complexity of the situation. He had been trained to act decisively, but life had a way of challenging even the best-trained instincts. Marcus understood that this was part of the human experience, balancing duty with empathy, protocol with understanding. As the tension slowly eased, a new layer of complication emerged. A passerby, noticing the crowd and the commotion, approached cautiously and asked what had happened. Marcus explained briefly, emphasizing that it had been a misunderstanding and that the car was indeed his. He spoke calmly, aware that the words chosen now could influence perceptions far beyond the immediate scene. The passerby nodded, expressing relief, and then moved on, but Marcus could sense the ripple effect. Stories would be told, perspectives formed, and lessons learned, all from a single encounter. Yet, despite the resolution and Marcus's efforts to maintain calm, there was a lingering unease. He realized that even when the facts were clear, human judgment could still falter. People might remember the incident differently, focusing on the initial suspicion rather than the ultimate truth. Marcus reflected on the broader implications. Throughout his career, he had seen countless cases where assumptions and bias led to misunderstandings, conflicts, and sometimes injustice. This encounter, while personal, mirrored a much larger reality, a reminder that vigilance and awareness were essential in every interaction, regardless of one's position or status. Marcus decided to address the crowd briefly, speaking with the authority and clarity that had defined his judicial career. "I hope everyone here understands that assumptions can lead to mistakes," he said. "It's important to pause, verify, and treat each other with respect before passing judgment. This is a lesson for all of us, and I hope it will be remembered." The crowd listened, some nodding in agreement, others quietly reflecting. Marcus's words carried weight, not because of his position alone, but because they were spoken with sincerity and composure. The tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of understanding and shared humanity. Even Officer Price seemed to relax, recognizing that the moment could serve as a constructive experience rather than a source of shame or conflict. However, the emotional impact of the encounter was undeniable. Marcus felt a mix of relief and lingering tension, knowing that the situation could have unfolded very differently. He thought about how quickly misunderstandings could escalate, how easily assumptions could lead to conflict, and how important it was to respond with patience, clarity, and empathy. This realization was not new to him, but experiencing it firsthand brought a deeper understanding, one that he would carry into every aspect of his personal and professional life. The officer finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Judge Green, I apologize for any distress I may have caused. It was never my intention to make you feel unsafe or disrespected." Marcus accepted the apology gracefully. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your words. And I hope this experience serves as a reminder of the importance of understanding and patience in every situation." Even as the incident wound down, Marcus remained aware of the eyes around him. People were still watching, still forming opinions, still learning from the scene that had unfolded before them. He understood that actions often spoke louder than words, and that his behavior in this moment could influence others far more than he realized. By remaining calm, composed, and respectful, he had not only resolved the misunderstanding but also set an example for everyone present. As he prepared to leave, Marcus reflected on the lessons embedded in the encounter. He thought about the young people in his community, the colleagues in the legal system, and the countless individuals who might one day face similar situations. He realized that fairness and justice were not guaranteed by titles, uniforms, or appearances. They were upheld through awareness, empathy, and a commitment to understanding. Driving away from the scene, Marcus considered how the incident would be remembered. Some might focus on the initial misunderstanding, others on the resolution, and still others on the broader lessons about human judgment and bias. He hoped that everyone who witnessed it, or who would see it later through social media, would recognize the importance of patience, empathy, and careful judgment in every interaction. At the same time, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent his life advocating for justice, and now he had experienced firsthand the challenges that many people faced daily. This encounter, while brief, had reinforced his commitment to fairness, equality, and respect for all individuals, regardless of their circumstances. He knew that the lessons of this day would inform not only his judicial decisions, but also his interactions with others in every aspect of life. Even as the city around him continued its rhythm, Marcus could not shake the intensity of the experience. He thought about the subtle ways assumptions shaped behavior, the impact of bias on human interactions, and the responsibility each person bore to act with understanding and care. He knew that mistakes would happen, that misunderstandings were inevitable, but he also knew that the response to those moments defined character, integrity, and the possibility for growth. Marcus's thoughts turned to Officer Price. He recognized the officer's humanity, the difficult position he had been placed in, and the courage it took to acknowledge the truth and apologize. Marcus understood that this encounter could serve as a turning point, not only for himself, but for the officer and the community around them. By choosing patience, clarity, and dignity, Marcus had transformed a tense situation into an opportunity for reflection, learning, and growth. As he continued driving, Marcus reflected on the broader societal implications. He thought about how bias, assumptions, and snap judgments could affect anyone, regardless of status or position. He considered the responsibility of leaders, educators, and law enforcement to recognize these dynamics and act with fairness and empathy. He realized that the incident on that city street, while personal, was also a microcosm of the challenges society faced in promoting understanding and justice. By the time Marcus arrived at his office, he felt a sense of calm and resolve. The turning point had passed, the misunderstanding had been cleared, the tension had been diffused, and the lessons were clear. Yet, he knew that the impact of the moment would linger, shaping his thoughts, actions, and perspective for years to come. The encounter had reinforced the importance of patience, empathy, and careful judgment in every situation, and Marcus was determined to carry those principles forward in both his professional and personal life. He reflected on the irony of the day. A man of the law, respected and accomplished, had been mistaken for a criminal. The moment was a stark reminder of the fragility of perception, the power of assumptions, and the importance of maintaining integrity even when others misjudge you. Marcus understood that every interaction, no matter how brief or seemingly ordinary, had the potential to teach lessons about humanity, fairness, and the responsibility to act with care. And as he settled into his office, ready to begin the day's work, Marcus Green carried with him a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of human nature, and a firm commitment to continue promoting justice, respect, and empathy in every interaction he encountered. After the tense encounter on the street, Marcus Green sat in his office, the hum of the city below providing a strange contrast to the whirlwind of emotions he had just experienced. The moment was over, yet its weight lingered in his mind. He reflected on how quickly an ordinary morning had transformed into an extraordinary event, a personal lesson wrapped in an everyday situation. The irony of being mistaken for a criminal while standing beside his own car, as a state Supreme Court judge, was not lost on him. It was a stark reminder of how fragile perception could be and how easily assumptions could shape interactions between people. Marcus thought about the officer, Daniel Price, and the tension he had seen in his eyes. Even though the officer had followed protocol and acted in what he believed was the right way, the incident had revealed the human side of law enforcement, how training and instincts sometimes collided with real-life complexity. Marcus understood that Daniel had faced a difficult decision. He had to balance authority with uncertainty, procedure with empathy, and safety with fairness. Marcus reflected that everyone, no matter their role, was susceptible to misunderstanding and human error. At the same time, Marcus considered the bystanders who had watched the event unfold. He knew that their impressions would vary widely. Some had seen a man wrongly suspected and felt sympathy or outrage. Others had perhaps initially agreed with the officer's assumptions, only to be confronted with the truth moments later. Marcus realized that the incident was a microcosm of society at large, a place where perception often precedes knowledge, and assumptions can influence reactions in profound ways. As he sat quietly, Marcus began to think about how this event would resonate beyond that single moment. He understood that it was not just a personal story. It was a reflection of the larger issues surrounding racial bias, assumptions, and interactions between law enforcement and the community. He thought about countless people who had experienced similar misunderstandings, often with far more severe consequences. He knew that while his title and position offered some protection, many others faced judgment without the benefit of verification, respect, or patience. Marcus decided to take a moment to write down his thoughts. He wanted to document the experience, not for personal satisfaction, but as a tool for reflection and growth. He began by recounting the morning in detail: the drive to the street, parking the car, the initial approach by the officer, and the escalating tension that followed. He wrote about the emotions he had felt: disbelief, frustration, and a sense of vulnerability that came from being misjudged. He described the composure he had tried to maintain and the inner dialogue that had helped him navigate the situation with patience and dignity. As he wrote, Marcus reflected on the broader lessons. He noted that patience and calmness were essential in moments of misunderstanding. Reacting with anger or defensiveness could escalate a situation, while responding with clarity and respect could diffuse tension. He understood that this was true not just for encounters with law enforcement, but in every interaction where assumptions or misjudgments could arise. The incident had taught him anew that human behavior was complex, and that integrity often required self-control and perspective. Marcus also reflected on empathy. He considered the officer's perspective, recognizing that Daniel had been acting according to his understanding of duty and responsibility. Marcus understood that the officer's hesitation and eventual acknowledgement of the truth demonstrated growth, awareness, and courage. He noted that empathy was a two-way street. It required understanding not only one's own position, but also the challenges and pressures faced by others. By embracing empathy, Marcus realized, misunderstandings could become opportunities for learning rather than conflict. The reflections extended to the community as well. Marcus thought about the bystanders who had witnessed the encounter, some of whom had recorded videos or shared the incident on social media. He realized that public perception played a powerful role in shaping narratives. He understood that moments like these could spark conversations about justice, fairness, and bias. Marcus considered how he could use the story constructively, highlighting the importance of verification, calmness, and mutual respect in everyday life. As the morning progressed, Marcus received a few messages from colleagues and friends. Some had seen the videos online, and others had heard about the incident through word of mouth. The reactions varied. Some expressed shock, some admiration for his calmness, and others engaged in discussions about the societal issues the incident reflected. Marcus replied to each message thoughtfully, emphasizing the lessons he had learned and encouraging conversations about empathy, fairness, and awareness. He wanted the experience to have a positive impact, not just on himself, but on everyone who encountered it. In the days that followed, Marcus found himself thinking about the encounter repeatedly. It lingered in his mind not as a source of frustration, but as a catalyst for reflection. He recognized that life often presented situations that tested character, patience, and understanding. This incident had been a test, one that he had approached with calmness and thoughtfulness, and the lessons he learned were invaluable. He began to consider how he could integrate these lessons into his work as a judge and into his interactions with the broader community. Marcus decided to share the story in a controlled and meaningful way. He wrote a reflection for a community newsletter, focusing on the themes of empathy, fairness, and the importance of not making assumptions. He described the encounter without sensationalism, emphasizing the lessons rather than the drama. He highlighted how even those who serve and uphold the law can be misunderstood, and how patience, clarity, and respect can transform challenging moments into opportunities for growth. The response from the community was encouraging. Readers appreciated the honesty and the emphasis on reflection and learning. Many shared their own experiences of misunderstandings, and conversations about empathy, bias, and fairness flourished. Marcus realized that while the incident had been stressful and unexpected, it had also opened the door to meaningful dialogue and awareness. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the lessons he had learned could reach far beyond the immediate encounter. Marcus also thought about the officer once again. He decided to reach out, not to reprimand or criticize, but to continue fostering understanding. He sent a message expressing appreciation for the officer's eventual acknowledgement of the truth and his willingness to learn from the experience. Marcus believed that constructive communication could strengthen relationships, encourage personal growth, and build trust between individuals and the community. Through these reflections and actions, Marcus came to see the encounter as a defining moment in a different way. It was no longer simply a misunderstanding. It was an opportunity to demonstrate resilience, integrity, and empathy. It was a chance to influence the community positively, to spark discussions about fairness and justice, and to reinforce the values he had spent a lifetime upholding. He realized that every challenge carried the potential for growth, and that how one responded to adversity often mattered more than the adversity itself. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself returning to the lessons repeatedly. He integrated the reflections into his work, considering the importance of perspective in every case he heard. He emphasized the value of patience and verification to colleagues, using the incident as a teaching moment. He spoke about the human side of justice and how assumptions and biases could affect outcomes if left unchecked. By sharing his experience thoughtfully, he encouraged others to approach interactions with care, awareness, and empathy. Marcus also reflected privately on his own emotions during the incident. He acknowledged the fear and frustration he had felt and the vulnerability of being misjudged despite his position. At the same time, he recognized the strength he had demonstrated by remaining calm, composed, and thoughtful. These reflections reinforced his understanding that character is not only measured by how one acts when praised, but by how one responds when misunderstood or challenged. He considered the broader societal implications of the incident. Marcus realized that situations like these were not isolated. They happened to people of all backgrounds, often with consequences far more serious than a brief encounter on a city street. The story of his experience could serve as a lens to examine larger issues, such as bias, assumptions, and the importance of verification. By sharing his perspective, Marcus hoped to inspire greater awareness and encourage meaningful change, one interaction at a time. In the quiet moments, Marcus thought about his community. He imagined the young people who looked up to him, the colleagues who sought his guidance, and the countless individuals who might one day encounter similar situations. He understood that demonstrating patience, empathy, and understanding in his own life could have a ripple effect, influencing not only the immediate environment but also broader societal attitudes. By the end of the month, the incident had become a story shared with thoughtfulness rather than judgment. Marcus reflected on how public perception had shifted, from initial curiosity and skepticism to awareness and dialogue. He recognized that the resolution of the incident, combined with his response, had created a constructive narrative. The story was no longer about misunderstanding alone. It was about growth, empathy, and the power of calm, thoughtful action. Marcus Green carried the lessons with him into every part of his life. He used them to guide decisions in the courtroom, interactions with the community, and personal reflections. He reminded himself that fairness and justice required not only knowledge of the law, but also an understanding of human nature. Patience, empathy, and clarity were tools that could transform challenging situations into opportunities for learning and growth. In the end, Marcus recognized that the experience had strengthened him. It had reminded him that no one, regardless of position or title, is immune to misunderstanding. It had emphasized the importance of responding thoughtfully, maintaining dignity, and fostering understanding. And it had provided a valuable lesson to share with others, that even in moments of confusion or misjudgment, integrity, patience, and empathy could turn a difficult situation into a meaningful opportunity for growth. Marcus Green, the state Supreme Court judge who had been mistaken for a criminal on an ordinary city street, emerged from the incident with clarity, resilience, and renewed purpose. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, that assumptions and misunderstandings would inevitably occur, but that the way one responded to these moments defined character and influence. He resolved to carry the lessons forward, guiding others with wisdom, fairness, and the quiet strength that had allowed him to navigate one of the most unusual mornings of his life.